Hi everyone, and welcome back to Designing a Website in Figma. This is episode number 11, and in today's video we are going to be creating a drop-down menu for our header navigation. In the previous video we have created a global navigation for our website and made sure you can click through individual pages to navigate around the site. Today I would like to take this global navigation one step further in complexity, and I would like to add a drop-down menu into our header navigation. This is a part of a series on designing a website in Figma, and if you check the description below you will find a link to a playlist where all of these videos, all these episodes are compiled. And now let's get into it. So here I have the header component along with the menu item components and so on. Here is what we have created in the previous episode. We have established these connections that lead us to individual pages, features, integrations, and so on. And also thanks to using components, using header as an instance of the main header component, we now can navigate around the site from any site. And we are going to follow this logic in today's video, which means we're going to work on the header menu right here and going to create some new components and interactions in this area, right? From a single place. Now we have a component that is called menu item. It's basically a button, but then we also have a separate component for our button, right? Just in case that we'd want to have a separate design for menu, for header buttons and for regular buttons. That's the reason we keep these separate. But we are going to be working with menu items in this video, which means that we are going to work with this menu item component. And specifically what we're going to do here is the following. Here, as you can see, we have 4 variants of a single component. Why are there 4 variants? Well, that is because we have one type of a button and then a second type of a button or a menu item. The first type is basically these items right here, right? So features, integrations, customers. And the second type of a button is the main one. The second type of the menu item. So that's reach out to us, right? And the reason why we have 2 variants on each of these types is because there is a hover interaction, right? So we defined that when you hover over this button, it's gonna update to this variant, right? While you are hovering over that specific element. Similar to this, we are going to follow this logic with our drop-down menu items. So this means I'm going to take these 2 and then press Alt or Option, depends on what system you're using. And then I'm gonna click and drag these 2 variants to create 2 more variants. And as you can see, here we have type regular, and Figma is alerting us that we currently have a conflict within this component, and that's because we have defined these 2 buttons as type regular. So this has to be a different type or a different state. So we need to, since this is going to be for the dropdown, I'm going to type in on both of these type dropdown, and now we can see that alert is gone. Figma is no longer having any problems recognizing this component. And let me just show you what this actually means, right? So when I now, let's say I'm going to add a stroke, right? We're not going to be using a stroke, but just for the sake of this example, let me show you what we actually did. So I'm going to look for a menu item in assets. I'm going to use this component, an instance of this component right here. And as you can see, we have these properties. We have the state, we have the type, and we have the text. So as you can see, I can now switch between regular, highlighted, which is this column basically, and then I can switch to drop down, which is this one, right? So you can kind of switch between states and between types, and also all the while you can change the text, right? So that is how we set up our button component, or specifically our menu item component. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to modify the design of this menu item of this type slightly. And I think what I would like to see here is we're gonna work with a slightly wider component. So I'm gonna just increase the width of these 2 variants. As you can see, because we have the auto layout set to top left alignment, the text is gonna stay on the left side, which is what we want. And also I'm gonna, as I said, I'm gonna remove these strokes, right? And we are going to create a small arrow that is going to be placed within this menu item whenever you hover over that. So let me use my pen tool by pressing P on my keyboard, and then I'm gonna zoom in and create this type of arrow pointing rightwards, right? And after I'm done, I'm gonna press enter, and then I'm gonna change the size to approximately, let's say 6 by 13, maybe, right? We just want to make sure that the size of this arrow fits the size of this text. Additionally, what we want to do is make sure that the width of this arrow kind of fits the font weight of this item, which means I'm going to set stroke width on this arrow to 1.5, right? So that's going to be, it's not pixel perfect, it's not, there's a decimal point in pixels, but I think it's gonna look better that way. And then I'm gonna, with this selected, press Command X and then Command V into this menu item, right? And as you can see, it's now aligned to the top because we have top center, top left set as our alignment. That doesn't need to bother us because we are going to, first of all, rename this to menu item arrow. And then what I'm going to do is select this menu item arrow and go over here to set this to absolute position, right? So I'm going to click on absolute position. Then I'm going to press Option V, and then I'm going to press Option D to align it vertically to the center and to the right respectively, right? So these constraints change to right and center, which is exactly what we need. We're going to keep it that way. And then I'm going to just use my shift and arrow, maybe just arrows, to move this arrow, position that approximately 14 pixels or points from the right side. So here you have the hover state of this menu item. Additionally, what I think we could do is add rounding, and the rounding is going to be similar to this menu item, so 8 on both of these. And then also I would just add a little bit of background to this menu item. I think we could go for like black with about 8% opacity, right? So extremely subtle, just so that you can differentiate between, you can differentiate visually easily that you are hovering over this element. Let me show you what we have actually created. I'm gonna again look for the menu item component, use that instance here. I'm gonna change the type to Dropdown, and then you can see it widened, right? And then I'm gonna change the state to hover. So this is the hover state of our menu item type Dropdown. So if I now resize this, you can see how the arrow is staying on the right side, right? So that's exactly what we need. Additionally, I think we're not really going to use this probably, but we want to make sure that this text fits within the width of this button. So I'm going to go for both of these, right? So I'm pressing Command and Shift and then clicking these, and under horizontal resizing, I'm going to set this to fill container. So this is going to happen, right? This is going to happen, and now the button is basically fully responsive, right? I doubt that we are going to use this state, but just in case, right? We want to make sure that this behaves identical to the final live coded version. So that is our menu item. Now we need to think about what is actually going to be in that drop-down menu, right? So I'm thinking here that we could have a drop-down that will say resources, and then under resources we will get blog, success stories, or case studies, right? Something along those lines. Basically different types of articles that people can read. And then we can have something like press or media. So here's a list of these pages that I would like to see in our new drop-down menu. But what does this actually mean? We have to create these pages, right? So at this moment, we don't have any frame prepared that is gonna serve as basically the blog page, right? We don't have any case studies page, and it's similar with press. So this means I'm going to duplicate these pages. So for example, this features one, I'm gonna duplicate that over here. I did that by pressing Option and then click and dragging, and I'm gonna rename this to blog. So this is going to be our blog. I'm going to also change the headline, which is just a placeholder for now, obviously. And then I'm going to duplicate this again, change that to case studies, right? And again, change the headline, case studies. And finally, press, right? So I'm going to rename this to press and the headline as well, press. So we have created these new pages. That's brilliant. That's the first step we need to take. And now we actually have to start building our drop-down, right? So we have a menu item right here, and we're going to duplicate this menu item 3 times, right? So we're going to have blog, case studies, and press. So I'm going to change the first text to blog, the second one to case studies, and the third one to press. So that's the contents of our drop-down menu. Our drop-down menu is going to contain 3 components, 3 instances of the menu item, type drop-down, right? But it's not going to be hover. Hover is only going to be available in the prototype mode when you actually hover over these individual menu items. So this means that I'm going to select all these 3 and press Shift A and rename this to resources dropdown, right? With this selected, let me do 2 things. I'm going to add a fill, so it's going to have a background, right? Then I'm going to add some padding, probably around 12. And then also it's going to have probably some rounding. And the rounding, I think, could be only on these 3 edges and could be, let me see what fits best. So I'm going to turn on hover on this one. So this is 8 and the radius is going to be 12 points more, so that's 20, right? So 20 works best for our drop down. It kind of creates this nice rounding effect, and I think that looks best, right? And then I'm gonna try and see when I remove the top left rounding, looks kind of like a bubble, which is intentional. And yeah, this is basically what you're gonna get when you hover over the resources drop down, right? You're gonna get these things, and there is the hover state, right? So I'm gonna turn this off. I'm gonna turn this off to default, and then let's go for like 260 on the whole width of this drop down, and then make sure these 3 elements it contains are set to fill container so that the size changes with the size of the drop down, right? That makes sense. It's basically, again, responsivity all over again. So with that said, we have the visual style of this drop-down menu kind of ready, right? We now have to start prototyping. So when you use this drop-down and you click on blog, you would ideally want to go to blog, right? But we have to define such an interaction. So let me go to prototype. Then with this blog menu item selected, let me connect the blog directly to blog, right? On click, navigate to blog. And then case studies, that's gonna be the same, case studies. And then press, that's gonna lead to press. Great. So whenever we are going to use this drop-down, we are going to enable the user to go to these pages, which is first of all the goal, and second of all, if we use that within our header component, it's going to be automatically set up everywhere. That's great. And what's the next step right now? We have created the drop-down content, but we don't have the drop-down right here. So we need to create the resources drop-down. But there's one problem that we need to solve, and that is we need another type of the menu item. We get the default, we get the drop-down, and we get the highlighted. But we also need something like drop-down parent, right? So let me just enlarge this, and then let me duplicate this first, this variant. Let me duplicate that right here. And this is going to be type drop-down underscore parent. It's going to be another special type of our menu item, and it's going to contain this arrow as well, which I'm going to paste in right here. I'm also going to rotate that, and I'm going to set this to hug contents. And since this is now fixed, I'm going to set the menu item text to hug contents as well. So this now happens. I'm going to make sure that this arrow is the same distance from the right side as the text is from the left side, which is 20. And right now here we have 11. So let me reduce that 1 to the right and 10 to the left. that's 20. And then let me compensate for this overlap by increasing the right padding by, let's say, 20, so that's 40 in total. And then also let me make sure that the color of this arrow is the same as this menu item, which is black with 50% opacity. So that's our special menu item. And what I'm going to do now, since we are almost ready, I'm going to duplicate this customer's menu item, and then I'm going to change the type to dropdown underscore. You can't see what's behind the underscore, but it's dropdown underscore parent. And this is going to create a new menu item with an arrow pointing downwards. And I'm going to change the text to resources. And this resources, I have to make sure that under prototype is not leading anywhere. So when I select this resources directly, you can see that it's going to on click go to customers, so that needs to be removed. And also there is going to be a hover interaction, but the hover interaction is defined on this level and is leading to this variant, which is again something that we do not want. So let me actually enlarge this once again and create additional hover state for this. I know that this kind of gets boring and complicated, but keeping a system intact like this is extremely important if you want to then scale your website design and keep everything in order. Don't worry, we are getting closer. So now, while hovering is gonna lead not to this state, but to this one, I'm gonna add state hover to this variant, right? And I'm gonna also change the color of the text and the arrow as well to fully opaque black. So that's black with 100% opacity. So I can stack the menu item parent drop down right here, right? So next to these, awesome. And now we can actually start creating the actual interaction, finally, right? So let me move this resources drop down right here. And we're going to do one thing. We're going to select this resources drop down directly, right, under menu items. Then I'm going to go to prototype and add an interaction. I'm going to use this point right here and connect that to our resources drop down frame. What's going to happen now? On click, navigate to resources, except this is not going to be on click, but this is going to be mouse enter, and that's going to be open overlay resources drop down, right? Now we need to play around with the positioning, right? We established that when you hover over this resources, when a mouse enters this area, and then this drop down will open. But where is it going to be displayed? Well, right now it's set to centered, so it means it's gonna appear somewhere around here. But that doesn't make really any sense. So we need to go for manual positioning and then make sure that it shows up right below our resources drop down, right? That it shows right here. So this is the position that we would like to see with our drop down menu, right? So it's going to be instant and it's not going to close when clicking outside. So let me now try and define a specific type of interaction, and that would be, right? So first of all, as you can see, when we now define this, you can see how from every page, if you hover over resources, you're gonna get mouse enter open overlay, right? And that's gonna happen on every page. So now we have defined that on every page, when you hover over resources, you're gonna get this drop down. So that's the power of the component-based approach. And then we're gonna define on this resources drop down frame, I'm gonna add an interaction that's gonna be mouse leave. So when our mouse is gonna leave this frame, then what's gonna happen? The overlay is going to close, right? So let's just go through what we have set up here. When our mouse enters this area, this button, an overlay is going to open. But then when our mouse leaves this area, this overlay is going to close. I think this could work. I have one suspicion why it actually might not work, but in any case, let's open this. Let's open the prototype and let's see what we have created. So here's the top menu, and when I now hover over the resources button, the overlay is going to open, and then when I hover over individual buttons, they are going to react to my hovering. So it works. That's good news. The bad news is that you can't really differentiate the drop-down against the background, and we are going to fix that by using a shadow, right? So let me go to design again and then add an effect on this frame. We are going to be using a significant amount of blurring, but then also what we're going to do is select clip content on the frame and use negative spread. So the shadow is going to be smaller, right? Smaller than the element, and I think that looks good, right? So let me test this out. So resources, right? This is awesome. You can differentiate it quite better now, but still the shadow could be moved a bit towards the top. So let me do that. Let me move that to the top. Increase the opacity maybe increase the spread, -25. Let me see. Yeah, this is nice. Let me actually decrease the spread again and decrease the opacity, maybe increase the Y coordinates. Yeah, I think this is nice, right? So this is what we have right now. When I hover over individual items, it's gonna highlight. Then when I click on block, it's gonna go to block. And as I said, drop-down menu now works on every page. So as you can see, I go to case studies, it works. Press, it works. Blog, it works, and it works from every page. Even if I go to integrations and then go to blog, case studies, and press, the drop-down menu is working in all of these instances, right? So that is because we have set up this interaction on the component level. And when we want to now, for example, change the color of the drop-down to gray, for example, right? We can do that simply right here in our frame, and it's gonna update the drop-down across the whole website, as you can see, right? And the navigation still works fully to its fullest extent everywhere. So yeah, this is it. This is how you set up a drop-down menu in your global navigation on a website. If you'd like to learn more about web design in Figma, make sure to check out the playlist referenced down in the description. Make sure to also subscribe to never miss the upcoming episodes of designing a website in Figma. And thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching this episode all the way to the very end. I hope you have learned something new, and I will see you in the next one.